I'm going to tell you one thing. You can call me anything you want to call me. You ain't calling me a cheat. I don't cheat and I don't lie. So I learned that when I was a kid. If you did, the old man slapped you side of the head. Maybe somebody should have slapped him. But that's one thing you don't.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone, show 41 as we get going here in week number 2 of our season 3. I'm Shane Combs here with my brother Matt, and Matt, last week it was fun to be back at it, starting season 3, kind of looking at some reflection and some things that we think is real important for leaders to do. And as always, we want to thank Chris Good of Good Health Chiropractic Center there for all his support that he's given us through our YouTube channel and so forth. And if you're tuning in, watching us this week, encourage you to check out all the podcast apps wherever you get your podcasts. We're out there expanding the zone. Love to have you with us each week here during season 3. If you're in any type of leadership, coaching, teaching, principal, business, anything, I think you'll really get something out of this each week. So, Matt, as we always like to do, we try to title the show this week here on show 41. It's a little fair or foul. We're talking ethics involved in coaching. And like so many of our shows, we have something in the sports world or something in the news maybe that kind of generates a topic. And we have 2 of our most famous coaches at the college level that were kind of at each other. Why don't you set that up for us a little bit in terms of how we ended up on this topic this week?
Well, a lot of people by now know the whole Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher thing, where Saban basically accused Texas A&M of buying their recruits. Basically accused them of, implied at least that it was illegally, purchased their recruits, paid for them, whatever. Which, in essence, with the NIL stuff in college, I guess people are somewhat buying their recruits all over the place. But he came out in a press conference and said it. Really in an attempt to, I think it was pretty obvious, tarnish the reputation a little bit of Texas A&M. Well, obviously, Jimbo took offense to that. And the next thing you know, he has a press conference and he basically goes off at his press conference about how unethical Nick Saban is and basically really questioned his reputation as a coach and really fired some shots across the bow. So I think it basically, when that came out there, whatever that was, a couple weeks ago, or a week and a half, whatever, it was entertaining for sure to hear the press conference. But I think when you and I first talked about it, as much as we kind of laughed about the whole back and forth, we said, this brings up an interesting topic because there's so many things like this in coaching. I don't even know where you want to go first, but there's so many things like this with even at the high school level of, how do you handle with the media right after a game, after a heated battle, right? Or what can you say, can't you say? What crosses the line, right? There's a lot of unwritten rules, right, Shane, where it's like, yeah, you really shouldn't say that. Or even though it's not, it's not an actual bylaw or a rule or whatever, there's just certain lines you don't want to cross. And I just thought it was just an interesting dynamic that happened right out there in front of everybody with these 2 major college coaches. I think the first thing for me when I watched these 2 guys, Shane, maybe we can start here, is with Texas A&M, after Nick Saban had said what he said, they had an opportunity there, a choice to make. They could have kind of taken the high road, maybe just came out with a short statement, and really gave Nick Saban enough rope to hang himself, right? I mean, he had made himself look bad at that point. When Texas A&M fired back, do you feel like in some way that made them equally look as bad? Or do you think that's something at that level you need to do to send a message to your recruits that we're not going to take this type of thing? I mean, like, how much of that is a thing to send a message to your players that we're standing up to the giant of college football, but how versus how much that maybe hurt his reputation of a coach, firing back at Saban like that?
Well, it's funny, in preparation for this show, I told myself, man, I've got to really be careful not to get off on a different topic, because let's face it, Matt, in today's college game, and unfortunately, I'm afraid it's just a matter of time until the high school game, the name, image, and likeness is just a growing animal that's not going to go anywhere. And I think anyone who's listened to Expanding the Zone over the first 2 seasons knows that that's something that really, really scares me. I'm not a huge fan of it. I understand the need for some of it, but man, I've never liked the direction of where it's going, and it really concerns me. So I think,
Shane, let me interrupt you real quick, because I think we actually have done some stuff on the show before, and I'm like you, I don't want to get off topic, but I think it, maybe we can mention here real quick, because this is recent news. The OHSAA just had a referendum vote.
Yeah.
So the Ohio High School Athletic Association just had a referendum vote. We like to tie this into local high school stuff. One of the things on that referendum was the name, image, and likeness. And for people that don't know, I mean, it got voted down, in a landslide, basically, as I think most people thought it would. But the thing that interested me in that, Shane, is like, I don't know that everybody knew where the OHSA was going with that, because, as you know, on this show, I've never been slow to question the OHSA. I think it's our right to question them. We're member schools, but in this situation, I truly think what they were trying to do was not what most of the public perceived them trying to do. In other words, I don't think for 1 second the OHSA is pro NIL at all. Matter of fact, I think they're dead set against it, truthfully. But I think what they were trying to do is not make the same mistake the NCAA did. I think this is what ties into our Jimbo and Nick thing here, right? What did the NCAA do? They just washed their hands.
Right. You're saying the OHSAA was trying to be a little bit more proactive.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Wild West in NCAA, and I think the OHSA, because when we had a meeting with the OHSA administration and with the member schools, I mean, they explained to us, look, we're most likely, just like the NCAA, going to lose a court battle somewhere down the road in this. Someone's going to pursue this legally, and we're going to lose. Mm-hmm. And when we lose, do we want some rules in place to protect our organization? That's really what that NIL was. If you look at it closely, it wasn't, hey, let's bring NIL in. It was, hey, let's have some guidelines in case this comes our way. I don't think a lot of people realize that. I think the knee-jerk reaction was just to automatically vote it down. And don't get me wrong, I don't think voting it down was the wrong move. I just think you need to know why you were voting it down. But anyway, do you think, and I know I jumped in on you there, but like with this whole thing with Nick and Jimbo here, do you think this was only a matter of time with this NIL craziness that this was going to happen?
Yeah, because I don't think, we were necessarily getting off topic there too much at all. I think it had to be mentioned in order to get to the root of the issue here. I think what's happening is recruiting is at an all-time competitive level, and Alabama's been on top, and kind of what started all this was they finished second in the recruiting class, the way I understood it, as of the time of those press conferences and so forth. And it was one of those where everybody's jockeying and fighting for position a little bit. And keep in mind, Matt, these were 2 guys that had coached together. Right. I think it was back in 2002 or 3 or 4, somewhere in that. Well, it had been the LSU national championship team. I believe Fisher was his offensive coordinator at LSU, if I'm not mistaken. And it was so it's a situation where these guys have had relationship, or a solid relationship all the way through, and now here they are all fighting for the same prize. And I think, I guess the way I kind of start to look at it is, I've always felt like there's a line in our profession, like in leadership in general, principal to principal across the county, or coach to coach, or AD to AD. Don't you, in a way, feel like, hey, I care about my school the most, or I care about my kids the most, but we're still fighting the same battle. Where can I help you? Where can you help me? When it comes time to compete, I would like to beat you. You'd like to beat me, but we kind of have a common respect for what we do, if that makes sense.
Right.
So when things start to happen that maybe go right up to that line and sometimes cross the line, I think, is it entertaining to the outside observer? Well, sure. I mean, when I heard the two press conferences, I'm gonna be honest. I'm driving in my car all by myself, and I'm laughing right out loud. I mean, it was one of the most entertaining things I'd heard. We talked last week about podcasts and things like that. I was listening to these two press conferences, and it was funny.
Yeah.
But when I started to prepare for the show, I started to think to myself, wow, what if this at the high school level were to reach the media, or what if this were to happen on the sideline in front of 2,000 people, or what if this type of thing? So, like, I guess one of the first things in my notes, maybe this is the perfect time to go to this, is I've always felt like there's certain things from coach to coach that are some of those unwritten rules you talk about. You know what I mean? Like, be it if I'm in the third base coaching box and the opposing coach is in that third base dugout right next to me, and he questions a call, I have no right to turn to that coach and say something to that coach. If a player on the other team misbehaves, I have no right to say anything to that player. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's one of those things where let's not act like we haven't had a player misbehave before. You know what I mean? We're all, again, it goes back to that. We're all fighting the same battle. There's lines you cross. So I think sometimes what happens is when there starts to become that in-game dialogue that's maybe a little bit inappropriate, with a coach to coach, or an indirect comment, or especially to a player, that's out. Don't you think there's some of those understood things? So in this case, I felt like both of these guys, this was on purpose. Both of these guys knew what they were doing when they stepped up to the microphone that day. And I'm not saying that makes it right, but to me, this seemed very premeditated in my opinion.
Yeah. It really did. You're talking about two things there that are the same but a little different, because some of those moments in a game is kind of the heat of the battle where we all have those things. Like, for instance, I'll just give you an example. We were playing a game just this past season where, I'm with you. Like, to me, there's never a good reason for a coach to say something to another coach down the sideline, or in your case, from dugout to coaching box, whatever. And one thing I also don't like is a opposing player talking to like saying something to the opposing coach, or that coach to that player. That's not a good idea either. We had a situation like that this year where I was upset with one of my guys, and I was getting on him coming down the sideline about not playing defense or making a defensive mistake. And a player from the other team, and this kid had a reputation of being a little on the cocky side, but he says to me in the middle of the game, "It looks like he needs a break, coach. He's too tired to guard me." This is what he says to me. Okay. And probably the right response would have been nothing, but I pretty much tee off on the guy and said, why don't, no uncertain terms, shut up and play, and don't talk to me or my guys. You know what I mean? Not necessarily proud of that, but that's just the way it went. I think that there's some things that are just you don't do within the course of the game. But I agree 100% with you. This was more of you had time to think about it, and yet you still went and said it. That was interesting to me, and that's why I almost think part of this was, I don't want to say orchestrated, but I think it was thought out to be like, if we don't respond to this, we look weak. And I think that, and I don't know that I agree with that. Okay. I think Texas A&M could have looked really good by just saying, hey, coming out with a statement, and they could have really. You
think it's because it was Alabama?
And the only.
Would it be Alabama? Don't you think that plays a huge role?
I do, because I think they don't want to send a message that we are intimidated by this. Let's be real honest, the program in college football for a long time now.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I think that's probably it. They're in their league. They just out recruited them. They're trying to stick their nose in and be Alabama eventually. And I think they looked at it as, well, if we don't respond, we're soft. Because to us out here, am I wrong in saying this is a little bit funny? Because unless you're really naive, I think you understand that probably every college program at that level has bent a rule or two. So it's like when you are acting like,
well, especially now,
it's like mom used to say, right? When you're perfect, yeah. Like mom used to say, when you're perfect, you can throw the first stone, right? So it's like these guys here are, these guys here are accusing each other of stuff that they both do, quite honestly, and probably 20 other major college programs do. So yeah, I think that part of it was the ironic part to the general public and the funny part.
Matt, each week we try to throw something out in terms of leadership that we kind of learn from this, or it kind of gets me thinking that, and we live in a time of video. We live in a time of social media. We live in a time where everything is documented, and not just documented in writing, but probably documented in some sort of tweet, Facebook post, picture, video, whatever it may be. And I think sometimes in coaching, if you're wanting to be in leadership for an extended amount of time, I think that's something you have to keep in mind too. You know what I mean? When you go to how you handle those moments that are, as you said, in the heat of battle, and then especially when it comes to things where you have time to go. I think sometimes it's why it's so dangerous for high school coaches, or sometimes to talk to the media, 2 minutes after a double overtime loss where foul called, with a second to go and a kid made 2 free throws. It's a situation where more and more media are out there putting a microphone in front of kids, in front of coaches and different things. And I think there's something to be learned from that. So I think there comes an integrity in terms of a reputation and things that are going to stay with you for a long, long time. I once had a coach tell me, Shane, go coach your program and go live your life in a way to where someone would ever say something bad to you about you, no one would believe it. I mean, you want the first response to be like, well, I don't know that I believe that. And I think that's a lot of what these things have. So I guess, have you ever had a time like that in the media, or in a public speaking place where you're like, man, I wish I could have had that interview back, or that particular thing back? Or I guess I'll just leave it at that. Is there a time where you can think of, like, I know you mentioned the one thing, heat of the battle, where that is what it is, but more of a public situation where more people kind of had a chance to hear what you had to say or read what you had to say?
Yeah, I can't think of one particular thing, because I did always try to, and I think you said it well, take a few minutes after the game. I mean, let's face it, coaches have a responsibility to the media, right? We've talked about that. We actually did a podcast on that a while back, and talked about how they have a responsibility to the media. And there's some coaches that quite honestly duck that responsibility at times. And it's easy to want to duck that after a tough loss. The last thing you feel like doing is calling into the radio or talking to the newspaper, but it's part of the job. But I think, like you said, there's nothing that says that you have to do it, 2-3 minutes after the game either. I think most professional media people understand that it's going to be 15-20 minutes maybe before they get to talk to you after the game. You're going to talk to your team, you're going to decompress for a second, then you're going to go talk to them. And I think, the professional media people understand that. So I've always tried to practice that. I think that, I do think that you made an interesting point right there about how we live in a day and age where not only, do coaches have more media responsibilities, but kids are getting interviewed now more than ever. I mean, how many times do you see it after a game where somebody videos a couple kids, right, and interviewing them about the game that just happened? So do you think there's more responsibility on coaches now to set an example for their players, Shane, in the way they approach the media, but to almost train their players, right? Talk to their players about, here's what you should and shouldn't say, because I know, like, we've talked to our players more and more about that the last few years since these player interviews became more prevalent. And I would say that's my one thing that I would love to ask Nick Saban and Jimbo there in a private moment is, would you be upset if your players had an interview and said some of the things you just said about an opponent? You see what I'm saying? I don't know that sets like the best example for their kids when they get interviewed after a game.
I think that's a really intriguing point. You know, it's one of those things where I've always tried my best as I've done some public speaking, got in some podcasting, some different things, coaching. I try to do it. I actually learned this off of a podcast. I think it's so important as a leader, Matt, to record yourself. Take time to listen to yourself, take time to watch yourself. And it's just what you just said about your kids. Are you setting an example? How many times, like, I don't know if this is one that bothers you. One of my biggest pet peeves in sports is body language. I think body language just screams out loud exactly how you feel. But as coaches, are we guilty sometimes of,
guarantee you we are, yes,
of our body language?
Yeah.
You know, being like when we've made the third error in one inning, if a camera was on me in the dugout, you know, I may not just be like, you know, yay, you know, be like, you know, there's probably some frustration there.
Or when I kick the dirt when my son takes the called third strike in a 10-minute game, that's probably not real good body language either.
No, in the little league coaching box, I got to pay yourself a little bit more. But in all seriousness, you know, it's in your voice. Do you use the proper tone? That's not to say you can't raise your voice at your players or yell at your players or whatever. There's certainly a time and place for that. But is it purposeful? Or are you bringing energy to practice? Are you are you talking to an umpire, an official, in the right way? And again, that's not to say that you can't have conversation. That's part of our job. That's part of but there's still a way to go about it. So I think the media is a great example of that. Now more than ever, our players are talking to the media. Like I know here in our area, John Bruce and Derek Webb and Sir Brock Netter and Raven there at Chillicothe, because there's people, you know, Mike Smith and what he does with the litter media. They're constantly opportunities for our kids, which I think's awesome. You know, I mean, I think it's a huge life skill, and I think it's really, really important. I think it promotes high school sports. I think it's awesome. But to answer your question, yes, we have a total responsibility to teach our kids how to talk. I can remember after a tournament win, walking up the foul line there with a young man that threw an outstanding game, and I knew he was nervous because he had never done an interview before. He's a younger player, and I just tried to relax him, like, hey, make sure you thank your teammates, talk about your catcher, you know, just trying to give him some helpful tips or whatever. And he did it. And he did an awesome job. But it's one of those things where we are responsible for that a little bit. And I that's why I say, like, I think in this particular case, I know these guys are higher profile. I know the college level is a whole different level. Okay, I get it. But there's still something to be said in terms of their behavior and the way they represented their programs and those times there. To me, there was a lot of strategy involved, and will the strategy work? I guess only time will tell. But that's what I was most intrigued by, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned talking to that player. I can remember, you know, in a day and age that wasn't like it is now with the media, back in 1991 when we played in the state finals. Because it was the state finals, they had a press conference after the game. And I can remember walking to that press conference and Ron Lovely basically telling me on the way there, obviously you're upset right now. Everything comes out of your mouth needs to be classy. You know, don't blame officials. Don't blame anybody else. Take responsibility for it. Congratulate the other team. So he, even in a day and age where media wasn't a huge thing at the high school level, he had the foresight to think, I've got a 17-year-old kid here that's upset because he just lost. You know, I need to talk to him first. So I do think we as coaches have those responsibilities. the one thing that I thought too, Shane, and maybe this doesn't matter at that level because you're talking about multi-millionaire coaches who this is what they do. But did it enter your mind at all during this that it's a little bit sad that some bridges were burned? Because like these guys coached together at one point, right? And they had a history. I'm not saying they could never patch it up, but boy, it's going to take a while. I mean, you're talking now. I mean, you're talking some serious stuff was being thrown at each other in that. I mean, personal stuff about, being unethical, being a cheat, being a guy that nobody wanted to coach with, being a guy you could talk to whoever's coached with, stuff like that. I mean, my daddy slapped me or grandpa slapped me, should have slapped him. I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff. I'd have to go back. But I mean, like it got pretty personal. Do you think sometimes it's kind of sad when in a game, and I know at that level it's more than that, but where coaches burn bridges that sometimes never get repaired?
Well, I think it's because it was so public.
Right.
I think that's where it goes back to the, I can only think of a time or two where I was a little upset with a coach or disappointed with a coach, but I'll be honest, those were coaches that I'm good friends with.
Right.
And we discussed it in a private manner where, looking back on a couple things, I wasn't always right. There were some times I thought I probably was right or probably had to be, but nonetheless, it was handled in a very classy way to where the only two people or maybe 4 or 5 people that even know about those particular situations in the world are the 2 coaching staffs who talked about it in a very civil way in a very private moment. You see what I'm saying? It was. I think what happens here is it's so public, and I was saying earlier, like video doesn't go away. Think of all the it used to be images, right? Pictures. We think of pictures. We think of Jordan hitting the shot against the Cavaliers early in his career, and jumping up and pumping the fist, and or all those images that you think of. Well, there's also sound bites, like playoffs, like practice, like, all of those things. All you have to do is say those things and they become known. Like everyone knows the playoffs or the practice or a sports fan. I truly think that some of these things are going to fall into those categories. There's going to be certain sound bites you're just going to hear over and over and over. And I do think that's I think that's a little bit unfortunate in terms of those things when you don't have the ability to handle things a little bit more private. I think it can go long term. Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where you and a coach that, and I don't know if you consider a friend or not, like, had a situation maybe where you did talk it over in private to where you think back and like, man, I'm glad we handled it that way, because that could have been uncomfortable in a public setting?
Yeah, it brought to memory for me an unfortunate situation where a coach and I had a bit of a disagreement. I don't know, maybe even call it a falling out a little bit. Over some stuff, quite honestly, that wasn't that big a deal, but it was just 2 competitive people that took a little bit of an offense to what each other had to say. And this particular coach ended up passing away, actually, a short time after that, or a few months after that. And we had sort of talked before that, at our league meeting, and were cordial to each other at that. But I always thought to myself, I wish that would have went differently, because, we never really had a chance to totally patch it up. And I learned a valuable lesson from that, like at the end of the day, it's not worth it to just totally ruin relationships. It's just not. Even if it's a relationship that you're not best friends with a guy or whatever, you still have a relationship of coaching, and I've learned from that, and I've adjusted. I mean, there's been situations where I've been pretty frustrated with another coach, and most of the time on that, I've just kind of taken the high road, because again, it's not worth burning that bridge. At the end of the day, it's just not. especially at our level. We're coaching high school sports here. This is only a small part of our living. And why would we want to just totally, like I keep using the term burn a bridge, but I don't know what else to say. I mean, it just to totally end a relationship or totally just have an enemy, for life. I don't see the point in that. And I guess when I was watching this with these two guys, with Nick and Jimbo here, I kind of thought that, man, it's going to be a long time before they can patch this one up, probably.
Well, I think the lesson learned too is just it's honesty, and it's respect, and it's understanding perspective. You know what I mean? In coaching, gosh, in baseball, I once won a game by like 24-25. It was the most uncomfortable thing, where you're trying to make outs, leading off bases, and different things. I once got beat. Our team once got beat in the first round of our league play 28-2, and then beat that team 2-1 later in the year. We've all been there, right? You've been on both sides of it. Successful as you are, you certainly won a lot of big games, but I know you've been on the wrong side of some beat downs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're all understanding of frustrating moments and different things and different reactions, but if you're able to handle those situations with honesty and with respect and so forth, I think you can survive those heated moments, and then a little cooler mind, can take over and later. So the only other thing I had in my notes here, Matt, I always try to clean my notebook out before I get to the final thoughts. I did have one other thing where I don't know if the fact that it was verbal instead of physical, what role do you think that played? Like, because one of the first things I thought of in the car that day was the Juwan Howard, and then Wisconsin coach, Greg Gard, Coach Gard. Remember the Michigan-Wisconsin basketball situation, where that kind of started to have a little bit more putting the hands on the. Is there? I guess I'll just throw that out to you open-ended there. Like, how would you compare those two situations?
Well, I think whenever he gets to a point it's physical, I just don't think there's ever an excuse for a situation becoming physical like that between coaches. I just don't. I mean, I don't think there's an excuse for players either. But let's be real honest. We've all played the game, and when you play the game, you have to take yourself to a certain level, right, of competitiveness. Sometimes that can boil over. So I do, although I don't promote it, obviously, I do understand why sometimes players get into a bit of a shoving match or whatever. Not, again, it still has to be dealt with, but you sort of understand how it can happen, I guess. I just don't understand how that stuff happens with coaches. I really don't, and it goes back to the old, there's a lot of people who don't think you should have the handshake line. I know we talked about that in the podcast once, should you or shouldn't you, but like, it's just, you're adults, and no matter how upset you are, I just don't see how you can allow it to come to blows. But like, this whole thing with these two football coaches, obviously they were nowhere close to each other, so this was just a verbal thing. Eventually, though, they are going to be on the same field, and they're going to have to walk across that field and either shake hands or walk by each other, or not shake hands. Or
cameras will be glued to everything.
Oh, I mean, you don't think that's going to be the most watched college football game of this season? I mean, wow. So no, I do think there's a difference. I do. I'm not for either one, but words eventually, you can apologize, you can mend fences. It's a little bit tougher to do that when it comes to physical blows. I mean, that's to me, I and you may disagree, I just think that's crossing the line.
Well, I certainly do. And I guess I'll get us started here on closing remarks. I guess where I was going to go in closing was, it's the practice what you preach. I mean, if I, in my first year as a principal, if I've tried to sit middle school kids down in the office and just try to talk to them about how, hey, everywhere you go, you represent your family, you represent Paint Valley, you represent your teachers, you represent, you try to teach them that level of responsibility and ownership and different things. Well, it's the same as a coach. I think if you're a leader, you got to understand in every action you're representing a reputation, a character, a perception of who you're leading. You know what I'm saying? And it's one of those things where that's a big time responsibility, and one that you've been entrusted with. And I think you have to know what you're signing up for. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where we're all competitive, and you're in the heat of the battle. And in the heat of the battle, if you're in it 30 times and you do it right 29, the time you messed up is still unacceptable. You see what I'm saying? Like, are you human? Yeah. Can you? Yeah. Well, but at the same time, could it cost your job? Could it be a black eye on Benton County or now Uniota for you? You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's that responsibility of what we sign up for. And if we're going to demand it of our kids, it's kind of like my example of the body language, of the tone of voice, all of those different things. You know, am I demanding the kids show up on time? Well, am I the first one there? You know what I mean? Am I on time? And if I demand the kids to be prepared, am I prepared? You know, all those things. So that's just kind of where I would probably close it for the week on my end, Matt. Final thoughts in terms of maybe, because we kind of really unpacked a lot of things. It's been a fun show. Is there a summary or a capper you can put on it, maybe as one big takeaway that you'd want everyone to come away with from this show?
Well, I think you said that pretty well, honestly, because I was going to go in a similar direction. I think that, you know, I guarantee you these two football coaches who are highly successful, one may be the best college football coach to ever live, I think would be a fair statement. And the other has been,
hard to argue. Yeah.
Yeah. The other's been highly successful as well. I think if they were really being honest with each other, they would expect more composure out of their players than what they displayed that day, you know? And I think looking back, you know, if Nick Saban just says, instead of going off in the media, maybe they take that to the league office privately, that might have been a better way to handle. That might have been a better example to set for your players. I think as coaches, we all want to set the right example for our players. And if we're being honest, we don't always do it. You know, there's times we screw up. There's times, like you say, our body language isn't what it should be. There's times where we, you know, the way we talk to an official isn't what it should be, or whatever. But sometimes the way we talk to our players might not be what it should be. But like, I think we all want to set that example, and I think sometimes we all fall short. But I think, you know, this is a lesson to be learned in terms of just handling these heated situations the right way, taking a second, taking a step back, and just trying to think about what's this make our program look like? What's the example am I setting for my players in this? That's really what I took from this.
Well, Matt, I kind of lied there, I guess, a little bit, because as you were answering there, another major thing came to mind that I think is important. I know we're going a little longer this week, but I think this topic's really important. And again, I know that I'm one that is not a big name, image, likeness fan, but I'll ask you this question for leaders listening. Is this the devil of name, image, and likeness kind of sitting in the background and kind of laughing at these two greedy competitors? Like in middle school, I always have to get all the kid, like you always have that kid middle school where they'll go up, hey, did you hear what he said about you? Hey, did you hear what he said about you? And then they'll start fighting and they'll jump back and kind of laugh at those two getting in trouble. You know what I mean? In a way, is the lesson learned in terms of like, look, as we get into more media coverage, as we get into more name, image, likeness, as we get into more money involved, especially at their level, the money involved, is there a lesson to learn in terms of if you let the greed of the financial aspect, not to mention the competitive aspect that's there even at our level, it can consume you, right? It can take you to that out of body experience sometimes. And that's when, if you think about it, you do the one thing that could really cost you in your organization, or you say the wrong thing. I thought that was a really important final question to ask here before we close that out, because I think that's something that maybe I didn't have in my notes that as I was listening to you talk kind of came to mind.
Well, yeah, I think it's a lesson to be learned of. There has to be rules, there has to be structure, there has to be guidelines and everything that goes on, because when you have a highly competitive situation where these guys, major college coaches, their jobs depend on success. And whenever you have that highly a competitive situation, it's going to bring out the worst in people sometimes, especially when there's a feeling of desperation. And oddly enough, as dominant as Alabama has been, when I heard Nick Saban talk, I sensed a little bit of desperation, like, wait a minute here. I could out recruit all these guys when I was on an even playing field, but now maybe Texas has a little bit more money than we have in Tuscaloosa. Maybe they can generate a little bit more donor base, and all of a sudden, am I ever going to be able to win the recruiting battle again? And there's a little bit of that desperation where he reacted to that, I think, and maybe it was way more calculated than that, and maybe this is all part of his master plan. I mean, the guy's had a pretty good track record, but I just, to me, that did jump out at me, and I do think it's a product of this NIL, and and unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, I think, because college sports is something that I've always loved, but I do think there's some real danger in the competitive balance of it with this new system in place.
Well, good stuff. What a fun show. I hope everybody got a little entertainment out of it, at the same time, as always, able to pull a couple nuggets in leadership that maybe just make you stop and think about the way you handle things or the way you go about things. And again, that fair or foul topic, the ethics involved in coaching. Thanks so much to Dr. Chris Goodall, the support, Good Health Chiropractic Center, as I mentioned earlier on. He supports us on our YouTube channel. If you're out there listening to us on the podcast, check us out on the YouTube. Get the video of the show and obviously still the audio to listen or watch wherever you want. And then obviously, if you're a podcast listener, look us up on wherever you get your podcasts. We're out there, expanding the zone. We're into season 3 now. This is show 41. All of our shows are back. They're also on the YouTube channel. You'll get different things of some interviews, some facilities, and some different things throughout the year that we do there as well to promote high school sports and people who promote high school sports throughout our area. So, well, Matt, that's a lot of fun. We'll look forward to coming back at them next week here on show 42. But the show 41 here, the Fair and Foul, talking ethics and coaching, was a lot of fun. Hopefully everybody gets something out of it. Encourage the feedback and look forward to doing it again next week. So thanks, everyone.